episode 16 of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. I want to start out this episode by giving a big shout out to VEI, that's Valiant Entertainment Incorporated. Those of you that listened to my San Diego wrap-up episode know that my son Jaden had his laptop and sketchbook stolen at San Diego this year. Well, Valiant decided that they weren't going to let that stand. They donated 3 sets of gold books. For those of you that don't know, when Valiant puts out a new title, they always print up some special gold books where the logo, the title of the book is in gold, and those are very limited. Well, they donated 3 sets of those for the ValiantFans.com community, and then those members of the ValiantFans.com community bid on these 3 sets of books. So Jaden was able to take that money and get himself a really great laptop to replace the one he had stolen, and he even has a little bit of money left over that he's going to be able to spend on sketches next year. So, you know, VEI didn't have to do that. It was something way above and beyond. Not only do they put out great books, but they really care about their fans, and I can't recommend them as a company enough. They really engage with their fans. They really care. So if you're not reading any Valiant books, do yourself a favor and go out and pick something up. Now, the news this week that came out was that The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, has been cast as Black Adam in the upcoming Shazam movie from Warner Brothers. Not quite sure how I feel about this yet. In the comics, Black Adam has always been depicted as more slender than Shazam and a little bit taller than Shazam. Rock doesn't strike me as a particularly tall individual, and so it might be hard to find someone that's a little shorter than him but yet bigger. So at the end of the day, it might not really matter. You know, I think he's a great actor. So we'll definitely see who they choose to play Captain Marvel or Shazam. I look forward to seeing the movie when it comes out. Also in some news, the Walking Dead spin-off, which has been in development by Robert Kirkman over at AMC, got greenlit just a few days ago for a pilot. We don't really have any details about the title or anything like that. We just know that it's going to explore some of the other corners of the Walking Dead universe. So those of you that are big fans of Walking Dead will have that to look forward to. And finally in the news, Soule, who seems to write everything under the sun, is going to be going exclusive over at Marvel. He has said that he's kind of had a chance to write a lot of different books, and having done that, he wants to kind of scale back the number of monthly books he puts out and kind of get more depth in what he does write. So he'll be finishing up runs on Red Lanterns and Swamp Thing for DC. And after he's done with those, probably sometime around April 2015, you'll see him exclusively over at DC. This is not going to affect, however, his creator-owned title, Letter 44, which is put out by Oni Press. And Letter 44 is actually the title I'm going to talk about in this episode. Like I said, it's put out by Oni Press. It's written by Soule. The art is by Alberto Jimenez Albuquerque. The colors are by Dan Jackson. Now, just to give you a little background on the series, the title Letter 44 refers to a letter that was written by the former president to the current president. I guess it's kind of a tradition that as the new president comes into office, he'll find on the desk of the Oval Office a letter giving him advice or letting him know things that he needs to know from the previous president. So when this new president is elected, he receives Letter 44 from the previous president. In this letter, he learns that a lot of the unpopular things that the former president did were actually because that president felt it was in the country's best interest to engage in wars and to spend a lot of money on military because the United States had discovered there were aliens just on the other side of the asteroid belt, and they weren't sure what these aliens were up to. They were unable to find much more information than that. So the former president, fearing the worst, decided to get America involved in as many wars as he could so that he could increase spending on defense and develop more cutting-edge weapons to combat what he felt was going to eventually be an alien incursion. Also, it allowed him to have a lot of U.S. soldiers that had practical combat experience. So the new president has been elected, and he ran on a campaign of reform, and now all of a sudden he's thrown into this situation with this letter where he's discovered this big huge secret, and he knows that he cannot necessarily change all the things that he wanted to change and fulfill his campaign promises. So there's some conflict there. Meanwhile, the old president had also sent a team of 9 astronauts, 5 scientists and 4 military, to go out on a manned expedition to try to make contact and figure out what these aliens are up to. So there's a lot of different things going on. We have the thread out in space where we meet these 9 astronauts, and we're learning about them. And meanwhile, back on Earth, the new president is dealing with finding out about the situation, trying to do what he thinks is right. Should he let the American people know? Can he get America out of these wars? What should he do about the new weaponry? So there's a lot of different plot lines going on. It's very political. I mentioned to Charles Soule at San Diego Comic-Con this year that the book reminded me of the TV show 24 quite a bit. And Charles' reply was it wasn't a coincidence that letter 44 had a number in its title. So if we're a fan of 24, I certainly recommend picking this book up. One of the best things I like about it is that it focuses on the human drama. 9 issues have come out so far. We really haven't learned that much about the aliens, but it's kind of incidental. It's the human drama, it's the characterizations, it's seeing what the new president is going through and identifying with him. It's the politics and the motivation behind the people that make it an interesting story. We certainly feel for the astronauts. You're curious what the aliens are, but you don't necessarily need to see a lot of alien eye candy to make it an interesting read. Soule has definitely set up what I feel is a slow burn. He said he wants to go at least 35 issues and take his time to tell the story that he wants to tell, and he also says he wants to depict the science aspect of the series as realistically and as accurately as possible. So it's certainly an intriguing narrative. I highly recommend the book. It really draws you in from the first issue. And as I mentioned before, the human drama versus kind of an outer space alien cosmic story is very interesting. And touching on that point of the human drama versus an alien disaster eye candy kind of feel, quite a few years ago Hollywood put out 2 asteroid movies at the same time. One being Armageddon, the Bruce Willis disaster film vehicle, and the other being Deep Impact, which starred Morgan Freeman and Téa Leoni. Now, while I felt that both movies were good, and they kind of had the same initial plot device, they turned out to be very different. While the Bruce Willis movie that was made by Michael Bay was a lot of big explosions, a lot of eye candy, just your typical popcorn summer blockbuster. On the other hand, Deep Impact dealt more with the actual humans that were left on Earth. You still met the astronauts in space and knew what they were up to, but the movie was much more emotional. There wasn't a lot of giant special effects, and it was much more of a drama rather than an action. I kind of feel the same way about this series that Soule's writing. It deals much more with the human drama. It's very intriguing. It's interesting to put yourself in the position of the president or the astronauts. What would you do? There's been some action so far, and I know there's probably going to be more action coming, but I certainly appreciate what Soule is doing here with this heavy characterization and learning about these characters and trying to understand their motivations. It makes for a much more interesting story that I believe will have a lasting impact. It's not going to be one of those stories that you read and then forget about. Now let me talk a little bit about the art. I've thought a lot about this. Initially I felt like the art was perhaps the weakest part of the book, but as I've read more and more, it's kind of starting to grow on me a little bit. I think this is going to be one of those situations where until I have the complete story and I can read it from beginning to end, I'm not really sure how I'm going to feel about the art. If I could compare it to anything, I would say that it's a little more intimate and static than I necessarily would like it to be. I would compare it to a sitcom that uses just one camera as opposed to a multi-camera sitcom where the camera's just in one place and you see a big room and everybody interacts in that room rather than cutting from one character's face to another or taking different angles to give you a different feel. It's fairly kinetic, and Albuquerque does a good job of handling the action, what action sequences there are. His facial expressions are pretty good. There's just something about the overall feel of the art that I'm not sure if I like. Perhaps it's just not as clean as I would like it to be. Issue 7 is actually drawn by a guest artist, Joelle Jones, and I felt like the art in there suited the story a little better. It was a little slicker, a little cleaner. It felt more like it was elevating the story. So I feel like the art certainly doesn't distract from the story, but maybe it's not helping it as much as it could. That being said, I'm not going to stop reading this book anytime soon. If you like books with political drama, if you like books with heavy characterization that are tightly plotted with a lot of different moving parts, different plot lines, this is a book that you should be reading. Some of the things that Soule is doing with his narrative, the flashbacks, the leaving some things undiscovered, knowing that he's going to get back to them eventually, keeps you guessing. It makes you want to keep reading to find out what happened, what's going to happen, and how the characters even got to the point that they're at now. How did these astronauts get recruited? Why do they volunteer? What are their motivations? It's just a very rich tapestry that Soule has woven here that fits together well. We certainly don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, and it's going to be a fun ride discovering those pieces and finding out where they all fit. So once again, I want to thank you all for joining me. In the next episode, I'm going to cover Star Spangled War Stories starring G.I. Zombie by Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, as well as a wrap-up of the Harbinger series by Valiant. I'll see you then.